Thank you. Thank you, Anita. Okay, the class is recorded. So what I want to do today is I want to share a message, a talk of the Lubavitcher Rebbe that I studied, a talk that the Rebbe addressed in 1987 on this week's Parsha, on Parshat Vayigash, related to this dramatic, Yosef's dramatic life story. So let's get right into it. So if you've been following the narratives of the past Parshas, we know that this story kind of is a culmination of 22 years of drama, because 22 years earlier, Yosef was one of the 12 tribes, a young 17-year-old boy. He found himself in a position where his brothers were jealous of him for whatever reason, hated him, and I guess their feelings for him got so intense that they decided they need to do something about it. The Torah describes how they kidnapped him and they threw him in a pit. And then eventually they sold him as a slave to an Egyptian merchant. And this is how the story of Yosef's life kind of evolves. And then we read in the Parsha how Yosef ends up in the house of Potiphar and eventually ends up spending 12 years in prison. And then he rises to become the viceroy of the country that was the superpower of the time. He becomes like second in command in the Egyptian empire. And now this week's Parsha opens up, this Parshat Vayigash. And now the Torah describes the story of Yosef revealing himself to his brothers after decades, right? After more than 20 years of separation. And now it's like the moment is ripe for reconciliation. And this is what the Torah describes in this week's Parsha. So what I did is I just copied some verses from this week's Parsha, from chapter 45, that describes this emotional reunion. And I figured it would be really nice for us to look at these verses together. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment so we can read this together. And let's see if I remember. Yeah, there you go. Okay. So here are just in English, where the Torah describes this very, very emotional reunion. I'll read it and you can follow along with me. Yosef could not hold in his emotions. He dismissed all of his Egyptian assistants from his chamber. Thus, no one else was present with Yosef when he revealed himself to his brothers. He began to weep with such loud sobs that the Egyptians outside could not hear him. And Yosef said to his brothers, "I am Yosef. Is my father still alive?" His brothers were so horrified that they could not respond. Yosef said to his brothers, "Please come close to me." When they approached him, he said, "I am Yosef, your brother. It is me whom you sold into Egypt. Now, be not distressed, nor reproach yourself for having sold me here, for it was to be a provider that God sent me ahead of you. God has sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival in the land and to sustain you for a momentous deliverance." So this is the way the Torah describes this encounter, this reunion between Yosef and his brothers. So I'm going to keep these verses on the screen for just a minute because I want to take a moment to analyze this with you. Yosef reveals himself to his brothers. He reveals his identity. Imagine that they come to Egypt because there's a hunger in the land of Israel. There's a hunger, quite frankly, the hunger is ravishing the entire world at that point, or what was the entire world. The only place you could find food was Egypt. And so Yosef's brothers are sent by their father Yaakov to the land of Egypt to get food. And here they come in contact with the leader, the viceroy of Egypt, who seems like this very, very macho guy. The last person in the world that they expect to be their brother. And here Yosef shocks them and reveals his identity. He says, I am Yosef. Right? And how do the brothers react? And the Torah says this very clearly. They were horrified. They were horrified. They were so shocked that they could not respond. Imagine like they are like they're frozen. What? Like this is the last thing we possibly imagined. And then then Torah continues and we read on. Yosef said to his brothers, come close to me. And when they came closer, he said again, I am Yosef, your brother. Again, the same words. I am Yosef, your brother. And then he says, it is me whom you sold into Egypt. So when we analyze these verses, it seems as though Yosef is trying to make his brothers calm down. He's trying to calm them down. He's trying to make them feel more comfortable, right? They're in such shock after he reveals his identity. I don't know, maybe they're thinking of like running. They think he's going to kill them. So he's like, he wants to like calm them down. And he says, wait, come closer to me. Like, you don't need to be afraid of me. I am Yosef. I'm Yosef, your brother. It is me who you sold. But from the verse, it seems that his words seem to have the opposite effect, right? He says, I am Yosef, your brother, the one you sold into Egypt. So he now makes it clear that they are the ones who committed this crime. They're the ones that, so like, let's bring up all the juicy atrocities that they did to him. Why would Yosef choose to do this at this point when he's attempting to relax them, right? Why mention the words that I am the one whom you sold into Egypt? So that's question number one that the Rebbe has on this episode in the Torah. It seems to us that Yosef's brothers clearly were so shocked and uncomfortable and embarrassed and ashamed that this was their brother. And why did he have to like we say in Yiddish, like stech, like further emphasize the fact that, I'm the one that you sold into Egypt. The Rebbe says further, we know that the Torah is so precise when it comes to the words, when it comes to choosing letters, choosing words, choosing vowels. Why did Yosef feel it necessary to repeat the words, I am Yosef, your brother, twice? In these verses, you'll see these words, I am Yosef, I am Yosef. They already know who he is. Why the need to repeat it? So the Rebbe gives a beautiful explanation, and I'm going to stop. I'm going to close the PowerPoint for just a minute so that I could just focus on the Rebbe's words, because the Rebbe's words, it's short, but it's so profound, and I think it's really like so relevant to each and every one of us. So as we know, human beings are so deep. Human beings are so complex. We're multi-layered. What you see on the outside, when you see me, when you look at me, you are only seeing one part of me, one dimension of me. There's a whole nother side of me that you don't see when you look at me. My innermost self, the deepest part of me that perhaps I only reveal to the people like in my most intimate circle, or not even. But there's two parts to me. There's the external part, there's what you see on the outside, and then there's me on the inside. Chassidus explains that when Yosef revealed his identity, the brothers realized at this time that they were only seeing the external Yosef, that they were not seeing the true inner Yosef. The brothers thought they were interacting with the Gentile prime minister of Egypt, but in reality, he was their brother. And what happened to the brothers at this point is suddenly they had this realization, like it clicked for them. They realized that their vantage point of reality was external, that they were completely deceived by their eyes. They were just seeing half the story. Let her tell her she can wait, or she can do it herself, okay? And this was clearly a very painful truth for them, right? This opened them up to this painful reality that they never knew their brother. But even when they saw him, they never really knew him. And I don't know why this resonated so deeply with me, maybe because I think that this is something you can all relate to. It resonates, You see another human being. Are we seeing them for who they are? Are we just interpreting things and making judgments based on their outward expression or their external actions or whatever we're seeing on the on the surface level? The brothers, the Torah says that Yosef recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. It was like, wow. They realized this painful truth that they never really knew who their brother was. And Chassidus explains further that Yosef was someone who really identified with people's innermost truth. He was such a person. He was gifted in that way. And you may know people like that, or you may be that person yourself, like, kind of person who just is a little deeper than most, or has a little bit more empathy, or a little bit more sympathy, or a little bit more intuition. Yosef was that person. Yosef had that intuition, and he easily identified the holiness within his brothers, right? Some of it was quite obvious. They lived most of their lives isolated. They were shepherds. They were involved in prayer and meditation and study, and they were giants. They were tzaddikim. Yet Chassidus explains that these brothers, these tzaddikim, almost lacked the ability to detect, to read the richness, the depth of Yosef's heart. And even when Yosef was living with them in Israel, they looked at him, they saw him as an outsider. They saw him as a danger to the integrity of the family. We have to get rid of this guy, this dreamer, this villain, right? This guy who has his own, he's open-minded, he's too worldly, he's dangerous. Gotta get him out, right? Kind of reminds me of the way other very religious and insular communities viewed Chabad for years and years and years. They looked at the Rebbe and they criticized the Rebbe and his viewpoint. How could you go do mitzvayim and outreach with people who may have eaten pork today. Like, and you're taking your yeshiva students out of their insular, safe, sacred spaces of learning, and you're bringing them out to the city of into Times Square, onto Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, where there's all kinds of who knows what that they'll be exposed to, so that they could look for Jews. What do you like? What are you thinking, Rebbe? Right? And yes, this is the way some of us were trained, or were I guess just this is we didn't know better, right? That what we see is what we get, kind of, and this is the way the brothers of Yosef viewed him. And so imagine when they encountered him in the form of an Egyptian leader, they failed to observe beyond the mask of a politician, right? They failed to observe him as a soul on fire, as an neshama. But what happened when Yosef declared? Yosef told them, "I am Yosef." It was not merely a revelation of who he was, but also what he was. And for the first time in their lives, Yosef allowed his brothers to see who he really was on the inside. And for the first time in their entire lives, Yosef's brothers saw the greatest holiness in the world emerging from the face of this Egyptian viceroy. And what does the Torah say? Go back to the verses. The brothers were horrified. They were so horrified that they could not respond. They were speechless. They were stunned. What disturbed the brothers? It's not only a sense of fear. It's not like they were scared. Oh my gosh, this guy's going to take revenge. No, they were special people. They were on the level of tzaddikim. They were horrified more than anything else. So they were full of remorse and brokenness that they caused so much pain to such a beautiful soul. Like I was thinking, like how this would look like, in 2021. What does this look like? So imagine that you were married to the most handsome, amazing guy in the world, right? But due to your own traumas and your own issues and your insecurities, you were mistreating your spouse emotionally. After 22 years of therapy and healing and a lot of inner work, all of a sudden you come to discover what you did to your innocent spouse. And how does you feel about it now? The pain is far deeper than the punishment and the consequences that might come your way. It's more than guilt, right? It's just this utter devastation you experience when you realize that what you have done, what you did such terrible things to such a good person. And that pain is so agonizing. And this is what the brothers felt like at that moment. They discovered what a tragic error they made, and they were like locked in their own inner orbit. Like they couldn't see outside of their box. They were incapable of appreciating or even caring to appreciate the depths of his soul. And they were tormented by this mistake. So I want to just pause here for a minute before I continue, but I think just this alone, and there's just a message for all of us. Like everything that's recorded in the Torah is a lesson for us, right? The 12 tribes were tzaddik. They were people of holy caliber. Let me tell you, like I'm no way trying to compare ourselves to them in any way. But the Torah records this episode for us to learn something, so we can grow from it in some way, can make this message relevant. And if there's anyone in our life we struggle to understand, the Torah teaches us that we can take this space, we care enough to dig deeper, learn more about the person, the individual, see beyond, what bothers us about them. Because underneath the surface, every person is a flaming soul, it's a neshama. Every person is worthy. They're on this planet, they're worthy. Hashem wants them here, right? So back to the Parsha. So it's at this moment, right? The brothers are shocked. They're in so much pain. They can't believe the mistake that they made. They failed to recognize who their brother was. It's at this moment when Yosef says to his brothers, back at the verses, he says, come to me, come to me. Yosef wanted them to approach even closer. Come even closer. Gaze deeper into me. Get to know me even better. Look deeper into the divine light that's coming forth from me. Imagine a child of ours, anyone in our life, can express that to us, like, just get to know me better. Come closer to me. Get to know me on the inside, or understand my struggle, see where I'm coming from. And when they approached him, Yosef said, I am your brother. I am Yosef, your brother. It is me whom you sold into Egypt. Yosef was not merely repeating what he had told them earlier. I am Yosef. He already told them that. He was also not informing them of a fact that they were well aware of. It is me whom you sold into Egypt. They know. They trust me. They're already in such shame. Rather, Yosef was responding to their sense of pain, to their guilt, and to their loss. And this is perhaps the most powerful message Chassidus teaches us from this story. The words, I am Yosef, your brother. It is me whom you sold into Egypt, in the original Hebrew, can also be translated as, I am Yosef, your brother, because you sold me into Egypt. What Yosef was telling them was something incredibly powerful, and this moves me even to repeat it. That Yosef says, I am the person I am today only because you sold me into Egyptian slavery. I would not be who I am today if you didn't do what you did. The brothers were trying to harm him, right? They separated him from his beloved father and his family, and they threw him in a pit and they sold him, and he endured so much pain Yosef endured. Yet at this profound moment of healing, Yosef can look at his life and say to his brothers, and I quote from the Torah, don't be distressed. Don't blame yourself for having sold me here, because there's a reason Hashem sent me ahead of you. Hashem sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival in the land, your survival during a time of famine. So Yosef is telling them the trials and adversity that I faced in this spiritual jungle of Egypt, the last 22 years of my life, everything that I went through is precisely what unleashed this glow. Chassidus talks about this glow that was just shining from Yosef's face that the brothers were now taking in. Yosef is telling them, the fact that you sold me, that I went through what I went through, made me the person I am today. that your mistake allowed me to become an ambassador of light, to become an ambassador of hope, to become an ambassador of healing to the world. So had Yosef spent the 2 decades, hanging out with his father in Israel, and, he would have certainly reached, great spiritual and intellectual heights, for sure. But what he's admitting now to his brothers is that it was only through his struggle that turned him into one of the greatest leaders of our time. It was only because of his struggle that he was able to be responsible for saving so much, for saving humanity. I also want to say here, and I think it's important to mention this, but Yosef was not indifferent to his pain. He did not repress his pain or suppress his pain or deny his pain. Yosef cries more times than anyone else in Tanakh. It's not like he was some kind of saint here. The pain was real and he felt it. But as we know from modern psychology, right, all the studies about emotions today, that he knew how to process his emotions in a healthy way. Yes, he addressed them, didn't suppress them. He gazed into the pain. He sobbed. He surrendered his expectations. He surrendered the dreams of what life might look like to God's will. And on the way, what did he discover? He discovered the most purposeful and meaningful life, his new journey, one that he could never have planned on his own. So what's the message that I got from this from this talk of the Rebbe? I think there's just so much depth here, aside from what we've mentioned until now. But I think we all suffer sometimes from the notion of if only, right? We all have expectations, just like the brothers. Many of us too live our lives thinking, if only, right? If only my circumstances would have been different. If only I was born into a different type of family. If only I would have had a different personality. If only I would have treated my spouse or my children differently. If only I would not have been abused. If only I would not have this mental or emotional challenge. If only I would not be this insecure. Life would be different, right? And yes, it's painful, and that reality is sad and tough, and you cry. Yosef cried. But then, like Yosef did, take a deep breath. And Yosef teaches us how to surrender our expectations and allow ourselves to entertain the idea that the individual journey of our life, all of its ups and downs, will ultimately allow us to discover our unique mission in this world. And somehow on this journey, we learn that the mistakes that we make are part of a plan that will allow more light to come into the world. Imagine that it's through our challenges and the hardest points that we bring most light into the world. Incredible. Yosef would not have brought all this light and healing to the world if he didn't end up in Egypt. And he didn't go through all this pain, right? Like Hasidus explains, I am Yosef, your brother, because you sent me to Egypt. I am who I am because of what you did to me. There's an amazing story that I read. It's actually a letter that the Rebbe, it was 1986. There was a young boy that was suffering from homosexual tendencies. He was in a lot of pain, and he wrote a heart-wrenching letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the Rebbe responded with a 3-page correspondence. I didn't read the 3-page letter, but I just saw this point, and I thought it connects so well. One point that struck me, I think this connects to the idea of this parsha. The Rebbe told this boy, I don't know why you need to endure this profound challenge. It's one of those mysteries of the world. You won't know until Mashiach comes. But, the Rebbe added, and this is unbelievable. The Rebbe says, sometimes a person possesses an incredible inner light that can change the world. And there's no way for this person to discover that secret power within themselves without being compelled to overcome a major life challenge. Can you imagine that there's no other way to tap into that inner light than to go through this challenge? So the Rebbe saw this young man, and he saw this young man in pain, and I'm sure he had so much empathy, but more than that, the Rebbe saw his crisis as an opportunity. The Rebbe said, this is no tragedy. This challenge of yours is a catalyst for you to touch your own infinity. This challenge that you're going through is going to set your potential on fire. It's through going through this that you will tap into your greatest light. So it doesn't ease the pain or minimize the difficulty. But I think if we understand this when going through a hard time, it can allow us to remain present in our life, right? And allow us to grow from our experiences in extraordinary ways. So yes, we don't always know why. We'll always have questions until Mashiach comes, and that's fine. But this parsha teaches us to surrender our expectations of what life is supposed to look like and open ourselves up to God's plan for us. And this was the message I took from this parsha. So thank you very much.